to remember. So before we move on, I think it would be appropriate if we just took a minute to reflect on the events of September 11th, the memory of those that lost their lives on that day and in the time following that. And so we'll just take a minute just to sit and reflect on that. So thank you. Thank you. So this morning, as we start thinking about what we face as a community, and what we face as a region, and what we face as a nation, it is important to look back and think about what happened 19 years ago, but also to think about what comes next and what we're facing today. And so I think part of the conversation that we wanted to continue to have is how can we as a region, as business, as nonprofits, as citizens in this county, in the region, what can we do to continue to help our economy, our families, people living in the region thrive and prosper? So part of this series and this discussion is to really dig into that and have conversations about that. So I'm really excited this morning, and what I'd like to do is welcome our presenting sponsor, which is the UVA Community Credit Union, my good friend, colleague, Amelia Stansel. So Amelia, if you would take the microphone and introduce our guest.
Great. Well, first let me just say thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. And on behalf of the credit union, we're honored to be sponsors of this program. When the opportunity came up, I jumped at it because we really value being part of this community, and we value being part of the resurgence of what's going to come out of this as the phoenix rises from the ashes. We're excited about it. We were thrilled to be able to sponsor Dr. Clower. And before I get into his bio, I also want to say welcome to the members of the Commercial Industrial Land Exchange that joined this morning. It's a group that I'm involved with in Northern Virginia, and it's real estate professionals, whether they're commercial realtors or developers, bankers, and so on. And I invited them as well to be part of this because I think it's important for the entire region to look at this and hear what we're talking about and get a sample of what the Fauquier Chamber is all about. So welcome to all of you that are on. I'm glad that you're here. As we get started, let me share a little bit about Dr. Clower, and I am going to read it, and I had a laugh because I had Carlton print it for me, and he was going to make an old lady eye comment. I was like, no, still 20/20 vision, so work with me, but I am going to read it so I don't mess it up too bad. Dr. Terry Clower is the Northern Virginia Chair and Professor of Public Policy at George Mason University. He is also director of GMU's Center for Regional Analysis, and the center provides economic and public policy research services to sponsors in the private, nonprofit, and public sectors. Prior to joining GMU, he was the director for the Center for Economic Development and Research at the University of North Texas. Dr. Clower has 10 years experience in transportation and logistics management, and Dr. Clower has authored or co-authored over 200 articles, book chapters, and research reports reflecting experience in economic and community development, economic and fiscal impact analysis, housing, transportation, land use planning, and economic forecasting. His scholarly articles have appeared in Economic Development Quarterly, Urban Studies, Economic Development Review, Regional Studies, Regional Science, and the we're just going to go with the Journal of Regional Studies. I'm going to get it wrong 6 times if I keep trying to say it. The Sustaining Regions and Applied Research in Economic Development. His most recent publication is his textbook, Globalization, Planning and Local Economic Development with Professor Andrew Peer. And Dr. Clower received his BS in Marine Transportation from Texas A&M University in 1982 and MS in applied economics from the University of North Texas in 1992, and a PhD in information sciences in the University of North Texas in 1997, specializing in information policy issues and the use of information resources. Welcome, Dr. Clower.
Thank you. So I certainly appreciate the opportunity to get to talk to you guys. And of course, this is yet another in the pantheon of Zoom meetings that you guys will be doing. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share while we get started here. Let's see, and let's share that. Okay, so if I'll get just acknowledgement, somebody wave at me and let me know that for sure that that's coming through. Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. Again, we're going to be just going briefly over several aspects of the economy right now. And then what I want to do is have plenty of time toward the end for us to have just a bit of a conversation about what's been happening and what is likely to happen. Now, obviously, these are some really interesting and challenging times. Those of you that have seen me speak before know that the biggest challenge that I will have in this is that I'm going to sit still during this presentation. I'm used to moving all over the place, you know, as you can tell, so we'll get through this together. As we move into this then, just a second, there we go, come on, don't. There we are. Then had to figure out what they wanted me to do. It wants me to scroll through. So we're going to talk about the national economy first. And our biggest challenge in economics these days is that the magnitude of our recent impacts related to COVID-19 have been so big that it really screws up the y-axis on everything we try to present. So it really, you know, it kind of makes everything look proportionally just how severe this downturn is. And we're, you know, and you can see from the chart there, just literally the percentage and dollar changes that we're talking about and drop off. One of the things to keep in mind though is, and it is hard to see, but if you look at those blips of what was going on, the US economy had actually started to slow during the first quarter. In fact, the official date of the recession that is going to be largely characterized as a COVID recession really started in February, even before we had the severe outbreaks in March and then the subsequent shutdowns. But what you're seeing is a severe but temporary impact. Now, what's also going to happen is when we get third quarter numbers, it's going to show huge growth in percentage terms, but it's of course not going to anywhere near, you know, be showing us back to, you know, going back to a level line of where we are. In fact, depending on who you talk to now, we're looking at projections of 2022, 2023, even later for us to get back to the level of gross domestic product that we had before this pandemic started. And of course, the same effect can be seen in terms of jobs. The huge spike that we've seen down there, literally we have seen the loss of millions of jobs. We lost basically employment that takes us back almost 10 years worth of growth. So this has been a huge hit. Now, having said that, though, that hit has not been uniform across all sectors of the economy. As you know, hospitality has taken a huge hit. And as we look at this and we look at some of the change over the last year, then what we're seeing is that leisure hospitality sector is the hardest hit. Education and health services took some hit, interestingly. Now, when we talk about education in that sector, education means private education. So state and local government picks up public schools and even public universities. But that education health service, what many people found surprising, of course, and that we now know, is that health services was impacted in a really big way, largely because of the loss of elective procedures. So while the hospital rooms were filled in many cases, there were a lot of the stuff that happens in clinics that basically had to stop for a few months or a couple of months anyhow. And so there was this odd effect of seeing fairly dramatic losses even in the healthcare sector. As demand grew at hospitals, it was the clinics and all that were seeing much less demand for their services. And unfortunately, even for the hospitals, those more elective procedures represent an outsized portion of total profitability. So we have a situation where even though hospital beds in many places are still relatively full, and not so much now as it was, say, 2 months ago, but it's a real hit on their bottom line because of the nature of how we bill for different services. Professional and business services, of course, that's a very broad sector, and it's where you start seeing the spillovers of leisure and hospitality going into the services sector. So if your local hotels are not operating, they're not paying their accountants, or they're not paying their lawyers. And it's been interesting to note the number of law firms that we have seen that have reduced staffs, pretty quickly in this. Retail trade is down some, and then of course, and when I say some, there you're talking about almost 600,000 jobs, but that's been, as we well know, a bit of a shift. So Macy's, Nordstrom's, those kind of places have really taken it on the chin, whereas obviously grocery retailers and staples suppliers have actually done fairly well. And you can see this across. Now, the one positive sector was federal government, but that's largely reflective of this being the census year. So that's, for the most part, those are temporary jobs and will be going away depending on this latest battle about when the census is going to end. But sometime in the next couple of months, those jobs will be going off the table. If we look at more recently and what we've seen in the recovery, and this is the latest data we have, of course, is August data. So this is looking at what was happening in July, keeping in mind that we saw a real surge in June. And then we saw kind of another round of outbreaks happening after, some of the holiday periods began after the 4th of July holiday. That really made a pause for some, but you can see where the recovery has been, and it's been retail trade has been recovering much. There's one thing that I believe we can take as being an absolute given, is that while in the early days when we were kind of stuck at home a lot more, we were actually, the savings rate went up. We weren't spending as much money as we usually do, but that money was literally burning a hole in our pockets, if you will. I mean, we couldn't wait to find new opportunities. And one of the things that makes me more positive as we move forward is that what we're just seeing is the market innovators are adapting retail sales. We are buying more stuff online than we ever imagined, and there's going to be some portion of that is going to probably be a more permanent shift. It just accelerated a trend that we were already seeing, and the really good retailers are figuring out ways to adapt to that. American ingenuity is such that we can find ways to get the populace to separate themselves from their money. And we will continue to do so. And that's actually a good thing. Manufacturing has come back a little bit, but not strongly. And you can see, again, where federal government, and this again is tied to ongoing census work and all this, but there have been some trailing sectors. So for example, information, which is web hosting and newspaper publishing and stuff like that, has not been rebounding well. And I think we're going to see even more fundamental shifts away from printed media as we go through. So if you're in the newspaper business, you're going to be an electronic business before long. And for those of us that like to read the newspaper on a printed copy, that's probably, we'll have to get over that. So let's focus now a little bit more on the Washington, D.C. region, our MSA, and what you can clearly show here is that we are suffering job losses for the first time since sequestration hit our economy, the Budget Control Act. So we've had this just relatively dramatic drop off here. And again, just a matter of losing years worth of growth, but you can see that we've started to have a bit of a rebound on that. We're still down year over year. So, we're talking about something in order of about, well, it's not quite 250,000 jobs that we are less than this year. And during our height, if you look at that chart before, we would over the last year or so would have been probably averaging something like about a 50,000 job growth per year. So that would indicate that right now we're pacing at having lost about 5 years worth of job growth. Though I would expect that as things begin to recover, we will see some spike ups. But again, this is going to be a bit of a slow recovery. I do not see this as being, it's not going to be the V shape, and it's probably going to be the Nike swoosh or some other weird, derivation of a symbol that we've been talking about. This slide, it gets a little complicated, and it really wouldn't work if we were doing this in a big room. But since we're all looking at our screens, we can do this, where the blue is Nova versus the Southern Maryland counties versus the District of Columbia. And you can see that Northern Virginia for the last 5 years or so has just dominated growth. And indeed, Montgomery County especially has had some real challenges keeping up with the growth. They've had a lot of turnover in their economic development community, and it's really been interesting. But it also, just proportionally, Northern Virginia has become bigger. So our hit on this particular effect from the pandemic has been a little stronger, but we are actually still pretty well poised to recover from this compared to some others. And let's take a look at how this goes. So our losses, and looking at year over year change, and the ranking that you see over there, this is by size. So our biggest sector are professional and business services. That is a wide, broad industry that includes lots of things. It includes accountants, lawyers, consultants, engineers. It also includes business services like personnel services. It includes even waste management services, services to buildings, that kind of stuff. So it's a very broad sector. That is our largest sector and what has been driving growth for us for quite a long time. It's a very, on average, well-paying sector. Leisure and hospitality took the big hit. State and local government, you see some hit there. And since we're comparing July to July, this is not just a seasonal effect. This is one of the things that's been challenging because of the drop in retail sales. We have seen local governments having to pare back. It's not been as severe across our region as it has been in other regions of the state that were already struggling, but we will continue to see this trend that just because of, state and local government has to balance their budgets every year. So we're going to see continued stress on those governments as this shift has happened. I mean, if you buy all your meals at the grocery store, your tax liability to local government is not nearly as high as it would be if you had bought that as a prepared meal at a restaurant. And that means that local government doesn't have the resources to be doing some of the things that they want to be doing to help us recover. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 going on here. And you can look at some of the other declines. If we scroll this forward and look at the difference of June to July and some of our recovery, that's when we started to seeing the real effects starting to hit state and local government. More recently, we have seen some recovery in leisure and hospitality. Retail trade has come up, but you'll note that we continue to have some weaknesses in the health sector, in finance, wholesale trade, and transportation utilities. And of course, that wholesale trade and transportation utilities are particularly important sectors on the more western counties of the DC metropolitan area because of the presence of the distribution centers and the big logistics center that's just a little bit west of you guys. Whoops. Now this one is something though that is very telling and actually encouraging. So what we've done here is split out that professional and business services from the professional science technical side, which is shown in green, versus the orange, which is administrative support waste management. So the low, on average, bit lower value sectors. And you can see here that the job losses have actually been concentrated in those lower value sectors. Here's the thing that's interesting. We're working now on several initiatives, and the Go Virginia Economic Development Program is working on initiatives about the tech talent pipeline in our region. The fact of the matter is we are still have thousands and thousands of job openings for people with the right information technology skills. Cybersecurity, both programming and administration of cyber systems and other types of those jobs are still, according to what we're seeing here, are still growing. So this is helping us to support, but that also means that we are having a bit of a bifurcation in our economy. The really high value added sectors, the higher wage sectors are doing quite well, but we have people who are living in that lower end of middle income and the upper end of the low income who have the jobs working in restaurants, hotels, and doing waste management and some things like that that are really bearing the brunt of this downturn. So how are we doing versus other areas? So we've ticked up the job growth that we had been seeing in our market had been trailing toward about the top of the bottom third of this list of the top 15 metro areas by population in the country. We had started to lag a little bit in some of the job growth prospects. This is where being a federal government base, still having the large presence of the federal government in our region helps give us some underpinning that other regions don't have. But one of the things, if you'll look at who our competitors are merging and how they're doing, so Houston, Atlanta, Dallas, and Phoenix all have certainly had job losses, but to a lesser extent. And this is telling us where our competition is largely being. The one thing I would characterize about any of those regions compared to ours is that they are growing. They are growing rapidly. They have domestic in-migration versus us still suffering from domestic out-migration in our population as a region. And they are comparably affordable to live. You know, the issue of housing we'll talk about here in just a couple of minutes, but this is one of the things that we're very much concerned that we're losing talented young people to places like Atlanta, Charlotte, who doesn't appear on this list because they're not in the top 15, and other places where you can go and have a career. Now, one of the other things, though, is the degree to which we telework and the degree to which that shift, while we're not going to all stay working at home forever, and there is a loss in what I call water cooler innovation from telework, we're going to probably do more of it, which also means that you have more people that could choose to have a job that's based at the Pentagon or based at the new Amazon headquarters that could realistically choose to live in Fauquier County. You know, having to do a really long commute, if you're only doing it once or twice a week, is a lot different than saying that you're fighting it 5 days a week. So let's look about what we have going here. Now, unfortunately, we don't have jobs data based on employers that is recent enough to really tell us a story. Those are based on employer surveys, and they come out at the county level much less frequently. What we get on a monthly basis is the household surveys that tell us, you know, that are used for the unemployment statistics. So if we look at, this is not where the jobs are located, but the people who live in Fauquier, what's been going on with their employment. And of course, as you can see there, again, it's been a significant drop down, and one that would talk about, you know, years worth of growth. But one of the things that's really interesting to me is you notice how through, say, 2013 through 2017, there was just a little bit of growth, but, you know, it kind of spiked up. But then look at what that line was doing. The slope of the line has changed dramatically, which is telling me that, you know, Fauquier County is growing and has been growing. Now you've got this you know, temporary hit, but it's one that there is a real underlying positive message about the direction of Fauquier County. Now, not all of those jobs are located in Fauquier, but those are the things that I know that the Board of Supervisors is working on in terms of planning for trying to increase the number of locally available jobs, particularly those that are at the higher wage levels. If we go back now and think about the unemployment days, so the spike in initial claims, one of the things is that there are still claims, but you guys are not seeing a whole lot of new initial claims for unemployment, but it also, that continuing claims tells us that it is coming down, but it seems to be a fairly slow recovery in that sense. So while we are not losing many more jobs, there are certainly some that we don't have a lot of growth, and there are still some notices that are coming out. So for example, you had one of your larger employers in the computer sectors issued a warn notice back in June for, another something about anticipate, I believe is 137 job losses that was announced. And of course, that is that notice that you're legally required to give the state employment commission if you know that there's going to be a layoff. And it's supposed to be 12 weeks in advance, but of course that's kind of gone out the window with the pandemic. That does not mean those jobs disappear, but is one where the employer feels that yes, they are coming. We've seen other significant warn notices, not so much in Fauquier County, but one of the ones we're really watching is United Airlines. Their warn notice for largely what would be Dulles-based employees is something like 3,000 jobs that they say will go away in October. And of course, they're tying it now to their lobbying efforts to get the federal government to issue another assistance package. We won't call it bailout, but another assistance package for the airlines. Whether or not Congress is going to do that before the election, I have no idea. There's just no way of telling how Congress is going to behave at the moment. So let's move a little bit and talk for just a few minutes about the housing market here. Like the rest of this region, your inventory of homes for sale has really cratered in the last few months. There's an interesting notice that trend from in 2015 through early 2019. If you want to put this in context of overall Northern Virginia, that trend line with those humps, which shows seasonal variation, right? The winter versus the spring selling season, that trend line has continued down for most areas and for the region as a whole. You guys actually had a bit of a spike up in 2019 in homes for sale, but it's really kind of cratered down. Now, what this means is that for those of you in the real estate business, the interest rates are at these historic lows. Everything looks really good for buyers, except that you just don't have any product to sell. And that at some point has to affect total sales, and of course, and then the revenues going into our realtors, both in terms of the brokerages and individual agents. The new pending sales numbers, and we do this as much just because at least it's relatively recent data through July in this case. So we did see some spike up, and some of that was just the pent up demand, because if you thought about it, the middle of our most usual busy season for real estate, we were restricted. We couldn't do showings. We couldn't do all that. So June and July looked really good, but a lot of that was just a matter of the rebound effect, and I think it will drop off. Now, I am told by realtors in part of our forecasting efforts that we do for the Northern Virginia Association of Realtors that they think that the selling season is actually going to extend into September this year, which would be unusual. Usually by September, you've run through your seasonal boost and then you get, just kind of ongoing. I'm skeptical of that, because one of the things that I'm thinking in my head is, if you're trying to sell a home at the same time that you effectively are homeschooling your kids, how the heck are you getting that done? And I think there will be folks that will pull their home off the market and just say, we'll just wait. Oh, by the way, for those of you in the real estate industry, let me say that I am anticipating that spring, summer of next year is just going to be gangbusters, because I don't see any reason to expect that interest rates are going to be substantially higher. They may tick up a little bit, but it's not going to be a meaningful burden. And hopefully by then we've got, at least if not a vaccine, we've got therapeutics that are lowering the risk factors of this, and we can get more back into a normal. And of course, there's still going to be that basis that some folks are going to wonder about the value of living in a 15-story condo building with 2 small elevators versus coming out and be able to buy a piece of property with a little built-in social distancing in the lovely bucolic areas of Fauquier County. Which, I mean, that before I moved to Northern Virginia, it's exactly the kind of place I was living. I was living in the equivalent, only it was North Texas up near the Red River. So in any case, moving along our existing home sales. And again, our data are just giving us some real indications that you see that spike up there where it was, big drop in the usual season and then a spike up. where you had the pent up demand of what would have happened. It still, though, is a notable drop over what we would expect in seasonal averages. And then from a price standpoint, we certainly are seeing an increase in prices. That's a demand driven thing, but different than what we experience in, say, McLean, Arlington more generally, Alexandria, and some parts of Fairfax, where the market is not increasing a lot in pricing simply because we're up against affordability realms. Homes are still, on a value proposition, Fauquier County is in a great position competitively moving forward, to be able to, somebody can go out and reasonably afford a pretty nice home and probably have a little property to go along with it. So let me move now just into a discussion phase for just a moment, and then we'll get to opportunity for you guys to ask questions. So what is our outlook? Well, actually, I think it was Paul Krugman that was talking about the stock market a day or two ago that basically said the person that says they understand what's going on with prices in the stock market at the moment is the person you know that you can't listen to because they don't know what they're talking about. We just don't have a lot of clarity. Will there be a spike in coronavirus cases? I mean, our big challenge with that is, how are we going to tell the difference between regular flu symptoms that you get any time of year versus this, and what does that cause about what happens at schools, at the universities, at the K through 12 education system, in office buildings? Do you think about the complexity of having a tall office building in Tyson's and you're trying to manage maybe the working populations of 40 or 50 companies that could be showing up on any given day? It's going to be incredibly complicated. We are not going to have a cure by November 4th. I know that we have some folks that politically would love to see that, but it's just not going to happen. Or if it does happen, I'm going to volunteer for somebody else to be first in line for that vaccine, because that's just not that's just rushing it. There is a process. What's going to be the real question is, what is normal in spring of 2021? Here's the thing. This has been a dramatically disruptive event to our economy, to our lives, but we are effectively resilient. I am in no way downplaying the level of trauma that is being experienced by many small businesses and by many individuals, many of whom were struggling even before all this began. But think about this, if you want to take it away, and I'm not being Pollyannish, but if we say now that the national unemployment rate has dropped down into the 8% range, 8.2, 8.3, I can't remember the number exactly, that would imply, though, flip that around. That would imply that over 91% of everybody who wants a job has one. We are resilient. We will figure out ways of doing retail sales. I can tell you what, my ring notices of drop-offs of boxes on my front porch have done nothing but accelerate over the last few months. And I think many folks are in that situation. Having said that, I'm no way downplaying those sectors of the economy that are directly impacted and the pain those folks are feeling. We will adapt, but I'm almost in thinking of David Burns, same as it ever was. But here's the thing that I would argue is different. Now, this is really dangerous to do early in the morning, but I'm going to throw some economic theory at you, but it's something you'll recognize, a different time scale. You remember the product life cycle from your college days? Product life cycles work, where you have this, your production consumption, starts as a new product and then it matures out. And then when you kind of hit that peak of maturity is when you really make profit on your products, right? That x-axis in this is a time scale. What we are seeing is that time scale compression. When I'm doing this in class, the example I always give is the telephone. The rotary dial telephone was the standard for 50 years, a half a century. And then we had touch tone. And then you think about it, how long is this model of your iPhone good for in the marketplace? Well, Apple would tell you only a year and a half because they want you to buy a new one. But literally, from a technological standpoint, it's just a few years. So what we are doing is seeing a massive reduction in that timeline, that x-axis that this chart goes over, and our adaptations in the way the products that we have, the way we distribute those products, the way we adopt and disseminate technology are all shortening down. And what we're seeing is an acceleration of a process that was already in many cases underway. That doesn't mean that there's pain to go along with it. We certainly need some federal assistance, but I am going to divulge a little bit of personal philosophy here, that I'm always scared that whenever the federal government comes to help, there's going to be strings attached. And just like we're seeing with some of the programs now, it's going to be, you know, what are the tax implications? What are you expected to do? And so there's some very much warranted caution among businesses in their taking on these loan programs. And then how does it count? What's forgivable? What's not forgivable? We're relying on consistency in our federal legislators. And the one thing that we've shown is our federal legislators are not necessarily consistent. So there's always some caution about that. Having said that, though, what's going to happen? We will have some businesses fail. They're going to fail because they didn't have enough capital to survive this downturn in revenues. They may have, because of a lack of capital, they don't have the capacity to adapt. In some cases, they are going to go out of business for no fault of their own. This is just a complete, it's an exogenous external event that is hammering businesses. To me, the key issue for what we do here is, for those that do fail, how do we get them back in the game as quickly as possible? Particularly our small business people. They are entrepreneurs. They are used to risk. They are upset. They are honked off. They are, you know, sad that their businesses are struggling or have gone out of business, but they are willing to take a risk. So one of the things that I am encouraging any economic development, any entity, any state, local government, anywhere in this country, is to do everything you can to get out of the way, to let those people get back into business as quickly as possible. And to do the thing of recognizing that if they had to do a bankruptcy on that, to recognize this was a special, this doesn't mean they're a poor risk. It means that they, you know, it just means that they got hammered by a global event that was completely unexpected, no way to particularly prepare for it, and therefore they are not a bad business risk. Or the notion, even as something as simple as permitting, why not do a thing that if you held a permit, just have an automatic issuance of a new permit? You know, do everything you can to let business get back into doing business. And of course, also recognizing then the great resources that are available. Now, this may be a little bit of a homer thing, but the Mason Enterprise Center has an office right there in Warrenton that has specific programs to help businesses adapt. I have got another program that we're going to be starting soon, funded by Go Virginia, that is really about, it's not really an accelerator in the traditional sense, but it is very much kind of an academy for small businesses to help them identify ways to pivot to either deal with the stresses of COVID or to take advantage of some of the emerging market opportunities that have come about because of this pandemic. So there are things that are happening and there are resources. And this is another role where both the chamber, the small business enterprise assistance centers, county government, the economic development entities can help you identify what's out there and what is available. Take advantage where it is, and look for, and particularly look for those that are looking for ways to support you to come up with your own solutions. And with that, why don't we, Chris, why don't we go back and just turn it over and do some engagement here with our audience?
I am going to actually turn over to Amelia, who's going to moderate the questions.
Sounds good. Well, that was awesome. I took lots of notes here now if I could figure out how to read them because my chicken scratch is not so great there. And I was lucky because Sylvia came in, so we were able to have little commentaries we were going through looking at this. I think what you had to say was very interesting until I'm waiting for questions to come up. So if you have questions, chat them up here on the side, by the way. So those of you that have questions, let us know so that we can ask them, as well as Ginger will help moderate as well. But some of the questions that I had, I like that you had mentioned about the election and if there would be a cure by November 4th. But my question would be, do you see a big change around and turnaround in jobs and in housing after the election, depending on which way the election goes, without getting political? But what do you see in the greater DC area and that trickle down out here in Fauquier?
I don't think there's going to be a tremendous impact other than, at least at the operational level for individual businesses and particularly small businesses. I think there's all sorts of things that could emerge that are going to make things upset from a broader market standpoint. It might be the way the stock market happens, or how smooth the transition is, if there is a transition in administrations, or, what the directions we're going to take. I think, at the end of the day, there are certainly some differences in what happens based on administrations, but presidents don't directly affect our economy that much. We overplay that left and right. And so the thing about it is the really smart business people and your business customers at the credit union, they are going to do what they're going to do kind of regardless of who's sitting in downtown DC, right? And there will be some adaptations. I am more interested in us being rational about our distributions of the vaccines and how we handle some of that. But we seem to have that. I mean, let's face it, the government is using the power of its purse to buy up a lot of vaccines before they're tested, but they're being produced. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to be destroyed because they'll show that it went. But what the folks that are sitting on these panels that are my faculty colleagues tell me, that are those kind of, scientists, the epidemiologists and all, the thing that really is that we're likely to see first will be some effective therapeutics. Let's face it, if you take death off the table, will we worry about this? And one of the things I keep reminding people of, this is an adaptation of the coronavirus. It is the same virus family that includes the common cold. We haven't cured the common cold, and we've been trying to do that for 100 years. So, it's that getting the therapeutics to where we can behave safely. But even said that, we can adapt even, where we figure out what's that right dynamic for social distance safety versus going on business activities.
Great, thank you. We had a question come in from the audience from Ethan Dunstan. The employment graph for Fauquier County was sawtoothed over the past 10 plus years. Is that seasonally based? And he had said that he wouldn't have expected or anticipated such large spikes.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat that one. It's just...
So the employment, and it's in the chat. The employment graph for Fauquier County sawtoothed over the past 10 plus years. Is that seasonally based? And his commentary is like he would not have anticipated such large spikes.
Yes, those data that we get at the county level like that are not seasonally adjusted. So yes, you are not. So you are seeing seasonal patterns of that. I mean, that's one of the reasons in our charts that we do on the other type of data that I just didn't do for the Fauquier employment data, is that we do that month over year comparison, so that we're kind of taking out, so we're comparing a July versus July instead of, a July versus September or something like that. Because, for example, schools, the local government employment always drops in July because that's when schools are shut in July, right? So those. Now, what is interesting though is the degree to which some of our seasonal hiring is not happening on the other end. We didn't get the hires in the entertainment districts, right? We didn't get the hires, at that we would normally see in summertime, even at movie theaters and things like that. So there have been some challenges this year that just didn't, things that we would normally expect to spike up didn't this year.
Interesting. You mentioned that you had the comment, reading Gary's stuff there. You mentioned the comment about our friends in Congress and their well, you had talked about them being inconsistent. I will also say they're free spending a little bit right now. But the CARES Act and then possibly the HEALS Act on its heels, how do you see the economy absorbing that amount of tax down the road? How do you see that helping us, I guess, long term, and what do you see the recovery there?
Well, so this is the challenge. We have done, we have added trillions of dollars to national debt, over the last few months with the CARES Act. And, part of me as being somewhat, well, I'm a fiscal conservative. And so I would have to say that I'm always challenged by the notion that what we're doing with our national debt levels, that we are not paying as we go along, that some of our things that we did to spark the economy have not resulted in increased tax revenues. So, we were adding to the national debt even before this. And so it's accelerated. Having said that, though, very much you don't want federal government on the sidelines here, because as bad as this, if we hadn't have done that spending, this would have been a lot worse. It would have been a deeper. And what we're still looking at is we're still calling this a recession. It could have very easily have become a depression. And indeed, there's still some risk of that because we don't have control of the virus yet. So continued government investment. I just have to say, as much as I worry about the total level of debt that we have, I think that has to be secondary to the more immediate needs of keeping the economy at that place where it can recover reasonably well once we get on top of this problem.
That's great, thank you. Is there more questions out there? This is a good time to throw them in chat, folks. They're waiting for more to come in. Here we go. Oh, was there one that popped in? Oh, excellent. I heard something beep. Do you anticipate a significant increase in the homeless population in the next few months if Congress gives no relief?
This is so we have these varying levels of relief and not relief for things like the foreclosure proceedings. And yeah, that is, this is the one that I tell you, this is what we call a wicked problem, because at the same time we're saying we're going to prevent landlords from foreclosing, from kicking people out for lack of payment of rent. And that is going to be happening a lot more because now these rent assistance programs are delayed, and Congress is arguing with each other over little details instead of getting something in place. That's going to increase homelessness. But the other piece that there's been little is that there's going to be a lot of financial stress for landlords, because the landlords arguably have money. Now, maybe I don't have as much detailed sympathy for a REIT investor that owns, 10,000 housing units across the country or something or another. Maybe I'm not as worried about them as I am individual households that made a very rational decision that when they moved into a new property, they said, well, I can rent my old one. Well, now if they're losing that income, they don't have the cash reserves to sit on it. They're not an investment company. So I do think that we are going to see a rise in homelessness. I think that one of the things that, and I don't mean this at all in a political way, but the practicality, what all of this is showing us is a couple of things: that we have not done much as a society to secure home ownership or a place to live for people that are at financial threat, but also think about what we require our school districts to do. It's become very clear now that our school districts are basically default daycare. Once kids get a certain age, they are the deliverers of social assistance programs in terms of the meals they do. And we have turned our schools not just into education institutions, but into the largest social services sector of our economy. And it's really, really challenging. And what we mean is that, it diverts their attention a little bit from the education mission that's at their core, but they have to do the rest of it to support it, because the housing stability, flows through the economy. I will mention that I saw some stuff. There was in the news today, the OECD has issued a report that says that the lost education is worth $15 trillion. the disruption in students' education. Now, I have not read the study and I have not read, their methodology, but I have to honestly say that I'm a little skeptical of that number, because I also believe our kids are pretty resilient and our parents are doing the very best they can to keep things going. I don't think this is a net, whatever you might lose in quality over several months or even a year of education is something that, is a permanent scar. I think there will be catch up, and indeed the kids are learning new ways of learning that may itself become more permanent. There's been a couple more questions, so let me see if I can read these quickly. Commercial, okay. Yeah, so the difference of the consumer real estate market versus the commercial real estate market. The folks that I talk to in commercial real estate business, particularly office buildings, and particularly those whose market are concentrated in the higher rise, multi-tenant office buildings, their increase, let's say their consumption of alcohol is likely increased. They may be doing, Janis Joplin acid in the eyeballs at this point. I mean, they are scared to death. And for good reason. And in fact, as one mentioned to me back in basically in May, just said, gee, what if this is the reemergence of the low-rise suburban office complex, right? Because if you think about just managing people coming in and out of the building of a 2 or 3 story building versus that, I think commercial real estate is going to be challenged for several years. And think about that from an implication of our tax basis for most areas. I think it's going to be a real challenge, because if we are going to, we're not going to be 100% telework, but maybe we're going to do more. That means that your space requirements are going to go. We're going to reconfigure the workplace. Now, there's this oddity that with social distancing, we've actually expanded some of our need for those people, but I think that overall aggregate demand for commercial space is going to lower. I also, though, think that there will be opportunities in industrial commercial development, because the industrial market is just going great guns. And that what we're going to see in some respects, we're already starting to see it, but it's this conversion of formal retail into basically distribution centers, fulfillment centers, be some kind of a blend of that. But yeah, if the commercial real estate market is going to be challenged, and I think that challenge is going to be in existence for a while. If you think about the number of building cranes we have in this region, up and down the Dulles corridor and all of that, all those buildings are going to come on the line, and I'm not sure where the demand is at the moment for all of that. Let's see, thoughts about the size of businesses and their ability to adapt, recover. Our local economy has a large share of businesses with fewer than 10 employees. Does that make us vulnerable or nimble and anti-fragile? Chris, I love that you use that phrase, anti-fragile. I have a colleague in Australia that has been preaching anti-fragility for years now. Most of us write him off as being a kook, but we know that that's not you. I tell you what, what you're going to see is that sweet spot. So a small entrepreneur that's just 1 or 2 people kind of thing, they can adapt pretty readily because it's just themselves. I think that it's going to be tougher, and in aggregate, small businesses adapt. Well, actually, small businesses and large businesses are where innovation usually happens. Mid-sized businesses, where they lose some of the flexibility of size, but they don't quite have the capital of the large businesses, or that's not where innovation usually happens. I think that we're going to see it, but I also think that this is going to be where the assistance that we can provide them in helping them to understand their market opportunities, maybe pick up a different skill set. But also, I have seen this before. I'm reminded of a project that I did actually in Australia. It was in South Australia, where a Mitsubishi plant had closed, and we were working with the vendors for that plant. And we were given all sorts of training about how to globalize their marketplace and do others. And most of them did nothing about it because they got stuck in that mindset of, I don't have time to do something different because I'm just trying to struggle with getting things out the door now. And so there has to be that thing of the realization by the business owner that they have to kind of stop doing something and focus some of their time on that adaptation. And that's a tough thing to do if you're the one responsible for keeping what market and what business you do have going out the door. How good is the internet infrastructure throughout the county to support kids who need education, business, which need to operate online? Fauquier is in better shape than it used to be. There is I've seen some recent infrastructure studies that suggest you've got a ways to go. It is certainly a challenge, and that is one of the great challenges facing us across the Commonwealth, is that we have places that are severely underserved in broadband capability. And we need to come up with different solutions for doing that, for getting broadband, and particularly for lower population densities where your average cost models are higher, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we have to get kooky with it like some of the stuff I remember even in the 1990s. There were companies that were talking about floating dirigibles up and using them as, as the antenna base for getting, cell phone signals around. I'm not quite sure we need to do that, but we certainly need to be looking to invest in infrastructure. And of course, I know that the county is actually looking at several other kinds of infrastructure that are going to support business growth overall. And that's both in terms of roads, water systems, et cetera. You think about one of your biggest emerging opportunities is data centers. You have data centers wanting to come to Fauquier County because land values are too high in Loudoun. But, and if you get the telecommunications backbone capabilities to support those businesses, that's going to spill over into residents having better access as well. Or make sure that you do that in the concession negotiations with the vendors that are providing those services, that they do, that it both is not just commercial services, but residential services as well. It's a key thing for success moving forward. And I see a couple of questions. These slides are certainly going to be available. The chamber has them. You can go there. There is the www.cra.gmu.edu is our website. We don't update the county level data, but the regional data we update on a monthly basis with regional and national. We keep about 75, 80 slides on an update cycle. I have students and staff that just joyously every month know that they have to spend a couple of days updating slides. So yes, we will certainly make those available, and certainly go to that website and you get contact if you have questions that you want to present to me. My contact information is there. Let's see, after the basics, food, housing, utilities, and schools, what are the goods or services people are most likely to buy? Well, it is the staples, but what we're seeing is technology products. There have been months when you couldn't buy a webcam if you wanted it. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but with me teaching online and stuff, I'm beginning to feel like Rick Wakeman at his keyboards. You have to be a certain age to know that reference. But, it's basically, I feel like I'm at this big board because I've got all sorts of, fancy microphones and cameras and little lights and all this other kind of stuff, and of course the green screen behind me. So we're all becoming potted and video bloggers, whether we want to or not. But what we are seeing is staples and electronic goods, and our entertainment spending has shifted. We're not going to the movie theater, so we're doing the online streaming. That's where we're seeing a lot of the difference in spending so far. Let's see.
I think we've come to the end of the chat questions.
Okay, good. And we're just about the end of our session here. So
yeah. Dr. Clower, thank you so much for your time and for sharing this information with us. And to everyone who's here, Dr. Clower has graciously agreed to follow up on any points of discussion or questions that you may have. So if you, as you're thinking about this and want to review the presentation afterwards, if you have questions, please do send it to the chamber, and we can get it to Dr. Clower or and follow up. He's agreed to continue to help. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. Appreciate your time and this discussion. I also want to just take a minute to thank the UVA Community Credit Union for sponsoring this event and for their support in the community. And with that, Amelia, I'm going to hand back to you because I believe you have a couple of things to do.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you again, Dr. Clower, and I see Vanna is coming in. We once again at the credit union bought a couple of gift cards. They're emailable. For Experience Old Town Warrenton, we have a gift card program, and you can get your gift cards online from EOTW's website. You can use it at almost every business in Old Town, so it's nice because it brings people in to spend a little bit of money out there. So we have two, and you had to pre-register for the event today. That's how we actually have your info. So the first one is going to, and I was told I wasn't allowed to look, so I can't check them out. Ray Knott. Ray, are you still on?
If you're gone, you don't get
Ray
it.
Knott from Atlantic Union. Are you still on there, Ray? You can unmute yourself and say, hey.
You have to be present to win.
Must be present
right.
to win.
Plus, now we know who didn't stick with us.
Ray is no longer on the call.
Share of our committee.
All right. Chris Rapin. Chris, are you
Yes,
still
I'm
on?
still on.
Hey, you're still on. Look at you. We can't see your face, but we see that. We'll get your certificate emailed to you.
Great.
And the second one is going to Patrick Small. Pat, are you on? Economic Development Manager for the City of Manassas. Are you on?
Patrick is he is not on.
Blacker. Everybody give Patrick, because I just said where he's from. No respect. I saw Marianne Benedelli was on. Is Marianne, are you still here?
I am still there.
Woo-hoo! All right, well, Chris and Marianne, watch your emails. I'll be emailing you later today your 2 gift certificates, and come on out and spend some time at Experience Old Town Warrenton. So
Sounds wonderful. Thank you.
you're welcome. And again, it was my pleasure to sponsor the event for the with the credit union, and I want to say thank you again to Terry for presenting today, Chris for being my partner in crime and co-host, and to the chamber. And you may have seen from Ginger that the this presentation, the recording of it will be available on the chamber's YouTube channel. If you can figure that out, you can go out and check it out. And I assume we'll be putting that on Facebook and other places as well. So any other announcements that need to be made from either of you guys?
No, thank you all for
Actually,
joining.
Well, with that,
so
thank you
Sorry,
all
one
for
one more thing. We do have is it Patrick Small?
Yep.
Yeah, Patrick Small. Yeah.
Is here.
Is here.
Well, there
So
are 3 of them because I want to be nice. We're not going to pick up for Mary Ann. So Patrick, next time you should speak up louder than earlier. But we love you anyway, and I can rib him because he's a pal.
thank you all.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. See you later.
Thank you.